Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. Special guest today, Brenden Kumarasamy. He is a communications coach and he is a public speaking expert. He also hosts on YouTube the Master Talk series. Brenden and I got to talk about why it is so important that leaders are terrific communicators and great speakers. And he gave some practical tips on things you can do to improve your speaking skills day in and day out. You don't want to miss this. Let's get at it. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is Kenny. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to improve their results, who want to develop themselves and develop their teams. And I have got someone here today that is really going to focus in on a skill that, Brenden, I don't understand why leaders don't work on this more often. It is the skill of being a great presenter. And I've got a guy who has really now devoted his career to helping us do that. So I want to introduce Brenden Kumarasamy, who is a communications coach and he is a YouTuber. And I will talk more about this at the end and post it when we post this out there. He has got a terrific series, a terrific channel called Master Talk. And Brenden, first of all, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Kenny, the pleasure's absolutely mine. I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing great, man, and great to finally get to connect with you. So I want to start here because there's so much I want to ask you. I want to start with how this became your passion. What led you to wanting to really help people to be better speakers and better communicators?
For sure. So when I was in college, I went to business school, and I studied the opposite of what I'm doing today, Kenny, which was accounting. And that was my life. But while I was studying to be that, I competed in case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing rugby or baseball or football, I was one of those guys.
Yeah.
So I did presentations competitively, Kenny, and that's how I learned how to speak. But then as I got older, what happened is I started coaching a lot of the students in colleges, mostly to help them win those specific competitions. And I accidentally developed a talent on how to coach other people on communication. And that's what led to the YouTube channel Master Talk, because I felt that all the information in the world wasn't really available for free in communication. So I just started making videos, and here we are today.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very interesting journey, the way you got there. So if I want to ask you and start here first and build on a few of these skills that you talk about. But if I'm running a restaurant, if I'm running a retail store, I'm running a call center, why is it important? Why is this a vital skill for me to have, the art of presenting?
For sure, Kenny. So within that context, what I would always say, even for middle management, the answer is the same, which is, as my business is scaling, are my communication skills scaling with the business? So what does that mean? When you're managing, let's say, a restaurant team of 3 people and you're just getting started, there's not a lot of customers, yeah? The communication chain's really easy. There's 3 people there, you know them all by name, you know all their birthdays. But when the team scales, you need to start to have processes. So we start implementing SOPs, standard operating procedures, to make sure that we can deliver consistent experiences and services. Let's say we use the restaurant example to the end customer.
Mm-hmm.
But if those SOPs are not communicated in a clear and succinct way, you cause chaos in the restaurant. There's a lot of miscommunication, which creates, wait a second, Kenny, didn't you tell me you wanted this order? No, I wanted this, Brent. You got the order wrong again. And that creates a lot of problems within the business. Let me give you a simple tip of how we can see the value here. One simple thing that managers can do literally as soon as this podcast ends is whenever they delegate a task that's really important to their team members, all they have to do, Kenny, is say, okay, so I just explained this to me. Before we jump off here, do you mind just repeating what you heard and understood from what I shared? So then the employee repeats and you understood really quickly that they missed a couple of points, so that you could re-clarify and increase the efficiency within the business.
Yeah, that is awesome. And that seems so simple, but in this fast-paced world that we're in, will leaders stop and do that? They have to. It's so vital. Um, I see a lot of fear when it comes to communicating properly, and especially speaking in front of groups. You talk a lot about overcoming that. What are a couple of hints and tips on how I can overcome what I like to sometimes call opening night jitters?
For sure, Kenny. So let me start the first point, which is the most important. The jitters will never go away. In the sense that, like for me, there's always a level of speaking that even I'm afraid of, and I'm the expert on the podcast. But it's just my level is different than others, which is, let's say me and you are getting lunch, Kenny, and Elon Musk calls me and he goes, "Hey, Brendan, I saw your episode on Kenny's podcast. I saw your YouTube channel. It's really good. I'll pay you $3 million. Can you coach me?" Yeah, I would be worried. I'd be a little scared. I'd be like, "Oh shit, okay, Elon wants some coaching." Right? So
Yeah.
yes, would I be worried about that? Absolutely. So I think for me, fear has always been, Kenny, a relationship that we need to learn to manage, like a marriage. We need to learn to manage it. We need to
Wow.
dance with it. So
Wow.
here's an analogy that I use to explain this. Think of a boxing match where one side of the ring is your fear, the stress, the anxiety, and the other side of the ring is the message, the goal. And all you got to make sure, Kenny, at the end of the day, is when that bell rings and the match starts, that your message wins the match and gets the knockout punch. That's all.
Wow. I am never gonna lose that analogy, man. That is a fantastic word picture. But I gotta say, Brendan, you are the first I've ever heard to say to embrace it. And to, the boxing match is like you're punching it and overcoming it. That is a that is a great analogy. I can't wait to share this out because there are so many that I know that are just shy totally away from that. Um that was great. That blew me away. Um
For sure, Kenny. And let me jump in with a thought here, just so
yeah,
people understand my background.
yeah.
Just three really quick. I spent my whole life presenting a language I didn't even know because I grew up in Montreal in Canada. French is a required language,
Hmm.
and I didn't know how to speak it. Second, because I got a crooked left arm because of a surgery I had when I was younger. So even now, when I present to my CEOs, I'm always anxious because they always look at my arm. I mean, I'm not as anxious anymore, but when I was a kid, I was because
Hmm.
they would always look at my arm. And I'm literally the opposite of what you would expect an expert in comms to have. I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. So yeah, I do believe anyone can master communication. I definitely had the jitters when I started Masterstruck. I was a kid for crying out loud when I
Yeah.
started making videos for
Yeah.
people. So,
Yeah. You're still a kid though.
yeah,
I could tell.
just a more successful one. I think that's the only difference now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want to stay along those lines because I also I come across a lot of introverted leaders that listen, I think leadership can come in all different shapes and forms. I used to be, I'd wear myself out from talking all day long, when I was running a store or whatever. Whereas there's some leaders are a lot more quiet, a lot more laid back, and they can be effective, right? But what tips do you have for that introverted speaker that a couple of things that help them overcome their introvertedness?
Absolutely, Kenny. So here's the way I think about it. For me, it's always been a question of understanding your strengths that you aren't aware of, especially for introverts. So let's comment on them. The first one is listening. Introverts are exponentially better at listening than an extrovert like me is. And the reason is because they speak less on average. So naturally, they'll spend more time listening. So it's a lot easier for them to adapt their message more effectively to the audience, or in the specific context you drove here, Kenny, it's easier for them to understand the problems that customers are facing at retail stores, at restaurants, from their employees, and find ways to re-engage them. Whereas extroverts always make it about themselves, and that's why I make a great podcast guest, because it's all about me and the tips I have to share. Right, so that's one. The second advantage is that the introvert is so good at the pause. Pausing is one of the most fundamental techniques in communication. I would argue it's the most important, where you take a pause to emphasize key points of your message.
Hmm.
Pausing comes really naturally to introverts, Kenny, because once again, they don't talk that much.
Yeah.
So all you got to do is teach them how to pause, and they go, "Wow, I didn't know this." Whereas an extrovert has trouble with it because we always want to fill up space because we like to talk a lot.
Yeah.
And then finally, the last one, accessibility. What does this mean? Introverts are more accessible as communicators than extroverts. Example, let's say we take Gary Vaynerchuk, the CEO of VaynerMedia. He has a massive personal brand on social media. The guy, you either love him or you don't. And for those who don't know who he is, just look him up for 5 minutes. You'll figure out what I mean really fast.
Yeah.
And by the way, this comes from a good place. I really love the guy and I really respect his work. But the other P is Brene Brown. There is nobody on planet Earth, Kenny, who has uttered the following words. I hate Brene Brown. Because if you do that, the FBI is going to come after you. The SWAT team's going to come after you, which drives the point. Introverts are rarely hated in any organization and they're more accessible. So triple down.
Yeah. I love that because I've heard a lot of people just try to change introverts, right? And you're saying use it to your advantage because you're right. The introverts that I know, they are the most thoughtful. They have that skill of thinking before they speak, which I sometimes don't have, and a lot of folks don't have. But introverts have that. And I want to ask you about the pause though, because I thought that was a great point, but I don't want to lose the introvert point. Be who you are. I love that, and just use it to your advantage. The pause I'm feeling, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like that's been a lost art as we've done more things virtually because we don't like to have any moments of silence, when we're speaking virtually. Thus, we then forget how powerful that could be when we're speaking in front of an audience. How can you use the pause, the power of the pause virtually, as well as even use it better when you're in person?
For sure, Kenny. So great point there. So there's two ways of approaching this. Let's start the pause, and the second point is around introverts that I want to close the loop on. So for the pausing, what I'll say is that the tips are actually the same, whether you're in person or online, which is the good news. The bad news is that the recommendation I have isn't something most people do, but it's how I teach my clients to pause more effectively. And it's an exercise I teach called the endless gaze. So the endless gaze is really simple, just most people don't do it. Meet somebody or find somebody in your house that you really just love. It could be a significant other. That's who I recommend this exercise with most to people who are married, people in couples, but it could be a friend too, it doesn't matter. And just stare at them for 3 minutes. That's it. Stare at them. Don't say a word. Just stare at them for 3 minutes. And it's really uncomfortable, even for people who've been married for 15 years. You do this with strangers too. But the magic of doing this is that if you can pause uncomfortably for 3 minutes, it's really easy for you to pause for 3 seconds in a boardroom because you're just doing the harder thing.
Yeah.
The second piece, which is your point about introverts, because you're right, I don't recommend that you try and change somebody's introversion. But what I would say, because no one's asked me about that nuance, is the 80-20 rule, which is, look, there's going to be 20% of an introvert's life that will need to change because that's just the life of the game. Like if you're not going to the networking cocktail, if you're not attending the party, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not giving yourself the opportunity to spread your personal brand. But the 80%, which is important to add here, Kenny, is but not to force the introvert to yell at people and talk. That's not what I'm saying. But the 80% is going when you're meeting somebody at a party, you don't like to talk. That's totally fine. Just make the conversation about them. So if somebody comes up to you and is an extrovert and goes, "Hey, let's say you like introverted Kenny, tell me more about you." All you have to do as an introvert is put your hand on their shoulders and say, "Forget about me. Let's talk about you." And then you ask them a question. And everyone wants to talk about themselves. So there you go.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice. And I used to use the analogy, all of us have been there, right? We get invited to a wedding and then we're sitting at a table of people that we've never met before. And then it becomes very uncomfortable. And I would always just start asking questions, just even a question of what do you do for a living? But I never looked at it from the introvert point of view. I think that is just outstanding advice. I want to stay on the virtual thing for a few more minutes, a few more seconds. Um, what are some other things that what are some other skills that we could translate to make our virtual presentations better that we do in person that sometimes may not translate as well virtually? What's a couple that we can work on that'll make our virtual presentations come alive even more?
For sure, Kenny. So what I'll do here is there's a couple of nuances with online, but there's some tips that I also want to share as well. So let's start with the nuances, then let's jump into the tips. So the nuances are fairly simple with online. It's energy, it's eye contact, and it's accessibility. So eye contact just means when we're in person, we always move our head around to look at the different people.
Mhm.
Online, just keep your eyes on the camera lens. Simple, just not easy. You got to force yourself to do that, like I'm doing in this conversation. The second one is accessibility. So accessibility just means there's more friction whenever you're trying to communicate with an audience member online versus in person. Because when you're in person, they're in front of you and you want feedback, you just get lunch with them. It's super easy. They're right there. Whereas online, the Zoom call just ends. So you have to force yourself to get on calls with people and build those relationships to get the feedback you need. And then the last piece is energy. Let's face it, Kenny. It's a lot easier to show up with energy in person than it is online
Mhm.
because of one simple reason: accountability. So, for example, even if we show up as our best self, and I'm giving you my best on this podcast, I'm still wearing sweatpants because I'm online. I don't have to shower, though I do shower for the record. But the point I want to drive is when you're in person, you don't have a choice anymore. There's a level of accountability. So those are the key differences there.
Yeah, and those are three so practical ones that are easy to do. And I think this is not doing some of these things, particularly the energy one you just talked about, causes people to do other stuff when they're, on a Zoom call or something like that. And multitasking is a myth, so I never do it because I just there's no way I can. But that'll cause people to start to do other work, put their cameras off and stuff like that. That is awesome. It all goes back to the presenter, and engaging the audience. Um, so just a couple more questions. This has been outstanding, by the way. A couple more questions for you while I have you. Um, it, I hear a lot from my middle managers. One of the reasons why I've been doing this show is because a lot of restaurant and retail that's the space that I came from, always tend to say, I just don't have the time. I don't have the time to develop myself. I don't have the time to, So aside from watching Master Talk, which I'm going to highly recommend to everybody out there, because I've watched a few now and it has reinvigorated my skills. Aside from watching that, what are a couple of quick things if I'm running a busy restaurant, I'm working 10, 12 hours a day, that I can do to work on my communication skills that are quick hits that'll take me a couple of minutes every day?
I'm super glad you asked that question, Kenny. So here's the frame, and then I'm happy to share the tips. The frame is communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one of those balls is eye contact, one of them is eyebrow movement, one of them is smiling, body language, storytelling, and it gets really confusing really fast. That's why people are really busy, like the demo graphic you mentioned, right? The restaurant owners, which I completely am empathetic to, right? A lot of my family have worked in restaurants too, so it's hectic. There's so many things going on. But now the question becomes, what are the three easiest balls to juggle? Because if we juggle those three easy balls, even if we only got 5 minutes, to your point, we can get the result. So let me riff off those three. So the first one is the random word exercise. Pick a random word like light bulb, like ceiling, like home, and create random presentations out of thin air for 60 seconds. Why is this important? Because it helps us deal with uncertainty. Because guess what, Kenny? Life is filled with uncertainty. You walk into a restaurant, one day says, "Oh, we ran out of chicken. Shit, we ran out of chicken. We gotta we gotta do something." So if you talk about light bulbs for 60 seconds, you could make sense out of anything. That's why I always say if you could make sense out of nonsense, you could make sense out of anything. And what's fun about this is you could do this exercise with anybody. So I get a lot of my CEO clients to do this with their teams in a meeting before the meeting starts. So everyone just goes, "Hey, like, tell me something, do light bulb, do this." And there's no judgment. It's just fun. That's exercise one. Exercise two is the question drill. We get asked questions all the time. Think about the questions a waiter gets asked at a restaurant or at a retail store. "Hey, do you have this? Do you have this?" And a lot of us are reactive to those questions, Kenny. So here's how we solve for this. Every single day for 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Answer one question that you think the world will ask you about your expertise, your products, and services. If you do that with 5 minutes of your life every day for a year, Kenny, you'll have answered 365 questions about the business. You'll be bulletproof. And then the last thing that I definitely recommend middle managers do, and I force mine to do it as well, make a list of your top 10 employees and send them all video messages just expressing gratitude for how hard they're working. Nobody does that across any industry, and it's a
Mm.
free strategy that improves retention of staff.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. You're building a skill while you're still showing appreciation too. In that, wow, those are three outstanding pieces of advice that don't take that long every single day. And I gotta try the light bulb one now. That is awesome. Just a random word exercise. I have one last question for you, and this has been outstanding, and I'm hoping we can connect again because there's so much more I want to go into with you. Who is someone? Well, actually, it's a two-part question. First, are you able to sit down and enjoy when someone speaks, or your mind always working? Wait a minute, and part two of that question: is there one or two people that you watch and you say they've got it nailed that you really admire the way they speak?
For sure, Kenny. So the first part of your question is yes. I do sit down and enjoy the presentation. I think coaching is a mode that you can turn off because
Okay.
if I did that every single time, like right now, if I did that with every podcast, I'd be miserable because half of the time I'd be thinking about feedback for Kenny, though you're doing great, by the way. But the other half is like I'd be thinking about what to answer. So I just go, you know what? Look, let's just move that on the side. I only do this with my clients, or else it just causes me a lot of anxiety. Unless somebody asks me, right? Or I see as a way to kind of add value to a network that I want to build. But other than that, I just watch and enjoy the show, and I don't let it bother me.
Okay.
So that's one piece to it. The second piece is who I admire. Obviously, it's subjective. There's so many great communicators in the world. Personally, somebody that I've been following recently that I think is absolutely brilliant is Alex Hormozi, who's the CEO of Acquisition.com, and he wrote $100 million offers, which is I think the best one of the best books of all time for me as a business owner. I really appreciate how nuanced and thoughtful his ideas are, and my ultimate goal is to be the him, but in my industry, right, in the communication realm. So I study him like if it was a cult, I would be the leader, right, of how Alex is of Alex's following. So yeah, big
Wow.
fan.
Wow. Man, I could talk to you all day. I really mean that. I'm gaining so much, and I know the audience is going to gain so much. Brenden, this has been fantastic. A lot of fun, so informative. I'll certainly be hitting you back up because I'd love to get you back on and dig into a few other things with you. But I'm gonna let you run for now, man. So thank you again. God bless you for what you're doing and how you put yourself out there to really just help other people. I love that. And there's nothing to go on to his YouTube channel, folks. Watch Master Talk. He puts them out pretty often, and they are spectacular. And I'm totally putting myself out there. I've watched three, and I've learned so much, and I'm gonna go back in and watch some more. So guys, this has been the Leading from the Middle podcast. This has been Kenny with Brenden, and Brenden, thank you so much again, and we'll connect real soon.
Absolutely, Kenny. I loved your energy, and thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.